But you're here with me today as I sit here alongside the Fraser River near once was the old Pattullo Bridge that they are essentially decommissioning and rebuilding a brand new mammoth-sized bridge. And, yeah, it's interesting how development can sometimes beautify areas and other times it can definitely remove the beautiful parts of it. Such as right now, if you're hearing a train has decided to start making noise or turn itself on where I am. And yet I'm in the middle of a beautiful area, as you can see, with well, these beautiful chairs that are out here just for the public to embrace and sit upon during the summer hours. Yeah, this area, although it's filled with skyscrapers, there's so many available for lease and empty patios up on the skyscrapers all around me, showcasing the idea that there's definitely a lot of free homes. And free, I mean, as in vacant. As I was on my way here, and this city is a few cities removed from where I live, I passed by many skyscrapers where I was at a higher elevated level and I was actually able to look right through the windows because many of these skyscrapers are just, instead of having walls on the outside, they increase the light by, making the whole outside of the window, I mean, the building a window. And so therefore, without curtains in most of these places, you can see into them, that they not only are lacking any things on the patios, they're also lacking any furniture or anyone living in, showing that there's a lot of people who have purchased these homes believing that one day they would sell them or rent them, that they too would therefore catch that magical carrot and live the life that all the TV shows showed us was possible. And yet I'm seeing more and more the reality of all of these vacant retail locations that have been sitting here for quite a long time vacant. And yeah, it's interesting wondering how many other people see that, and if in fact is my own personal reception perception being skewed. I often talk about playing Pokemon online, and I can definitely see an AI that's altering the game in order to perhaps cause me frustration. And if it's not an AI and it's a human character, well, pretty great on you to design such tactful and obvious in some cases tactics in order to dissuade me from being in harmony. And yet harmony is what I choose. It's the decision that I have made for myself. And I'm going to stay in this state of harmony, honestly, no matter what happens, what they try to do, and I say they, and you know who they is. They is that mysterious shadow group that pretends to be who they are when in fact they're a lot less than they believe themselves to be. So thank you for joining me today, and perhaps I will, at the end of the video, show you a glimpse of this mammoth-sized bridge alongside another bridge and alongside an older bridge that was built when my grandmother first came over, or perhaps when she was already living in Surrey. And they built this bridge called the Pattullo Bridge. And yeah, it's kind of a interesting drive across the bridge. The lanes are pretty narrow, and there has been an awful lot of accidents due to the fact that that bridge had been constructed the way that it was, and the turns and the twists, and you basically almost scrape by in the 4 lanes that it has now, and including a sidewalk, which was amazing. I had the opportunity last year to actually venture and walk upon that bridge, believing that that would be the last year that it was available. I might have this summer to perhaps take you back up there and share with you this amazing view of the Fraser River. Unfortunately, due to the humidity, not humidity, the perhaps pollution and, chemtrails and clouds, and basically visibility is pretty low. So I'll show you anyways. So I thought I would just hop on and talk about something or other. And I guess I have been talking because, my highlight in the beginning of this video was essentially talking about my visual perception of what I've seen on my way here. I've heard on the radio, not the radio, the podcasts and video news on the YouTube discussing about the overabundance of empty condos and houses all across Canada. The report actually from David Fraser's channel had reported that in Toronto alone that there's an estimated 2,500 empty homes. See, if you're unaware, what happened with the situation in Canada was that a lot of money was brought in, invested into the two major areas, Vancouver and Toronto. And a lot of the homes and such were bought up by overpriced buys. Like they were asking $1 million and someone would end up paying them more. And eventually, this rippled out into other communities surrounding Vancouver, such as Burnaby. And then it happened in Burnaby, and then they pushed them further out. And all at the same time, there was major construction projects going on all across the Lower Mainland. I mean, massive amount of sky rises being planned and built in Surrey, in New Westminster. They were actually the area that I'm standing on right now used to be actually on the Fraser River, but what they did in order to get the riverfront view contracts, they extended the actual docks further out into the river, essentially decimating the natural habitats of whatever's living underneath us, and put skyscrapers and therefore put their foundation into the actual river itself. So there, at one point in time, this area used to be a lot of docks for, industry, and yet now that's been moved over, I can see, onto the other side of the river into what used to be the natural habitat. So not only was the habitat of this area disturbed considerably, they also therefore affected when they relocated those machines or boats that I'm looking at now. And that's an awful lot of what's been going on is massive construction all over, including in my city, where they planned on building a skyscraper right in the middle of a 4-phase project that at one point in time had been shut down. Interestingly enough, it's now been redone and they're actually starting construction in a time where on YouTube or other news stuff, even from CBC and Global, I've seen little clips here and there from that, of a catastrophic situation to do with the banks and the mortgages and refinancing mortgages. And, a lot of people got these super low interest rates on their mortgages. And now as the interest rate increases and essentially the value of the homes crashes, and crashes, I really do mean crash, because unlike in the past when values went down by like 1 or 2%, from what I'm hearing on these reports is that the values are going down 30 and 40%. Like there's a major amount, especially from the high peak point where all of the hype was surrounding the investments of foreign governments into Canada's real estate markets. There's a lot of places, for instance, the building that I live in is owned by a gentleman who lives in China, as well as the building that my store that I once was part owner of, that was also bought up by a family out of China who both of those people never came back after buying it and basically hired people to collect the rent and such and essentially just hold on to the properties without any concern of updating it, repairing it, renovating it. It was more about, just keep it there. And if you can make a little bit of money, great. But these properties were essentially paid for in cash, as I understand it. And therefore, there was no actual requirement for financing or anything like that. So, but all along, there's been other areas and buildings where a large amounts of properties and land, there's an actual portion of land that once upon a time used to be the farmland for the city that I live in. And yet it was bought up by a smart choice company and held on to and doing nothing with it, including there wasn't any farm going on. It was just basically left to wait for a developer to develop it. And yet, even though many of these places are now available for sale, honestly, the price is astronomical that's being asked for. And I imagine, and I definitely foresee, a very large drop in this artificially inflated price points that even now, where someone might see a condo as being a great deal because it's went down in 10 or 20%, they're still looking to exchange their connection to the ground, to earth, for the sake of 800 square feet or 600 square feet. And definitely, if you come from other parts of the world, 800 square feet might seem like a huge increase to what you're used to. For example, when I was traveling around the world, Japan specifically, I stayed and visited people who lived in 400 square feet studio apartments, where their bathroom essentially housed a curtain around it because it was all of one room. And while this was for students, it was also for single men. And there's been a resurgence of hotels where you sleep in a pod. And, when we look at a brand new condo, for example, the ones that I'm standing at, and here, I'll share it with you. I know there's no one on right now, but this is a brand new one right here. And there's a lot of vacant, empty patios. And then there's an older one there, and there's another brand new one right here. When people come over and they're imported from other countries, and that's essentially what happened. There was a massive repopulation of the country that I live in, moving people out from major cities, displacing them due to this idea that their property was worth more and they could sell it for even more because it was a buyer's market, or not a buyer's market, I mean a seller's market, whatever. It was a market where, people were getting large amounts of money for the property they sold, and then yet they were still having to buy, but they were being pushed further out, all the way to like obscure places past Kelowna. Kelowna might have been like the jewel of that area of Canada, of British Columbia, my province. But yet there was people moving out to Prince George, and even further than that. It's just wherever you lived, in order to rebuy into the market and save some of that money, you were being pushed further out. But what was happening, though, is the actual land values and the amount of taxes for all of these new places would therefore be pushed up considerably. So really, the only person or organization or corporation or corrupted corporation who was actually winning was the governments who were collecting the outrageous increase on taxes. See, on a property, for example, without a skyscraper, you might, as a tax collector, collect a small amount of money for that actual land. But then when you build these skyscrapers, now you're collecting 10 or 15 or 20 or 30 or 40 times the amount of the tax money. And yet, you're really not doing much extra. See, when I was younger, the property taxes, for example, they included things like garbage disposal. They included things like postal service. You actually had a postman who came to your front door if you owned a house, even an apartment in some cases, and that was all paid for. And yet now we live in a world where everything is extra on top of the property taxes, which are still high, on top of parking fees, which all the cities are collecting portions of their taxes of the parking fees, or they're contracting it out to a third party and collecting a portion of that from that company, privatizing and such with their friends' companies and whatever. But we live in a world where taxes don't actually cover very much of what we live with. And that's a detriment. And that's something that most people who were imported into Canada, and I really do use the words imported. Like, I remember speaking to immigrants a long time ago, and my former partner herself was an immigrant. And going through the process of getting her to come here was very challenging. And yet at the same time, there were actual companies overseas that if you paid these companies to import you, or to help you immigrate in over here, your chances of success were considerably higher because you were paying into the system to come here. And there were actually companies that had standalone stores in the Philippines, in India, in China that would actually advertise, if you want to go to Canada for the great life, you know, you can earn $1 a day by working on the railroad. Oh, wait a minute. That happened in 1900s or before the 1900s. But that same advertising, if you want to have this life of freedom, then you can pay us tens of thousands of dollars and we'll import you. And if we can import you, then you can therefore then import the rest of your family after at fees, of course. But once again, it turns into an industry. And now with this disruption of moving out the local populations, and when I say local, I don't mean Caucasian or black. I mean the local populations that have lived in Vancouver, for example, for a very long time. Vancouver had been settled heavily by the Chinese population, by the Korean population, by the Japanese population. In fact, there is a Chinatown in Vancouver, which is pretty large, and it's been there for 100 years. Like it's been there a very long time, and yet that population as well was just pushed out, and other populations were pushed out, and those populations end up pushing out further. But then what happened was that they therefore imported hundreds of thousands of immigrant workers, and actually in a recent news report, Tim Hortons is in the crosshairs because they actually petitioned the Canadian government to allow for foreign workers to hire them by the masses. And I do mean masses. I mean, when I go to every single Tim Hortons now, there are very few Canadian people. And when I mean Canadian, I mean their English is Canadian English. Like in Canada, we've had people here who have lived here so long that regardless of what their skin color is, their English is Canadian, and you can easily tell that. And yet there are very few people who have been here that long when it comes to working at an A&W or a Tim Hortons or a Subway or a Chevron gas station, or, you know, you just keep going down the list. And in this news report, there's actually a spotlight on that Tim Hortons essentially got the government to allow all of these temporary workers. And what's happening is those displaced portions of the young population, whoever, whatever language they're speaking, they no longer have opportunities for jobs when they're in high school anymore. And that's the way it used to be when I was growing up. We would get a job when we were 15 or 16 at a local franchise, and that would be where we learned how to handle money and when we learned how to work with the public. And there was a lot of learning being done. And of course, we were becoming self-sufficient and paying our way ourselves. And in some cases, like for me, I was helping my family pay stuff. And now that doesn't exist anymore. And it's because, as per this news report, which perhaps I will pin right here if I can remember, and please do definitely watch it, Tim Hortons has, like many other companies, been abusing their workers. And I put that fully out because that is what I've even heard personally from people that I knew when I actually went to those restaurants. And there's a couple ladies that I would often see overworked, and they would tell me that they're working this job and then they leave this job and they run over to that job and then they run over to that job. And, you know, sitting here in your house when you've sold it for millions of dollars over what was asking, looking back and seeing, oh, well, they're making $17 an hour as minimum wage, not recognizing that the cost of food is far beyond that. And so therefore there really isn't much. And we come back into that whole tax system again. The only one who actually benefits from increased minimum wage is the tax collector, because then there's more tax dollars being consumed by those CRA and IRS and stuff like that. So when you increase the minimum wage, that means the dollar value of taxes that is being put into the system, put into that corrupted system, is thereby increasing, as well as sales taxes. You increase food at cost, well, the organizations have already benefited on the increased amount of gas revenue that comes in. But then that 5 or 12% that we pay here on our taxes, it essentially turns into a larger dollar figure as well. So it's not like anyone's benefiting. And we would definitely be best to actually bring things back down to like a 1950s level. and starve those organizations that are essentially feeding off of most of the other people. So yeah, um, I see no one has come on, which, it's very understandable because this isn't a conversation that perhaps, the world or the system really wants people to hear. And yet it's an important one because it does affect us all. So many people are trying to hide their head in the sand like a flamingo, thinking, well, I'm just going to let things go around, be as they are, and I'm going to make life as good as for myself as possible, without the full understanding that everything that happens is happening to everyone, and everyone that's aware of it and doing that hiding their head in the sand stuff, that's allowing it to continue on, because that's almost like permission is being given. I once came into the understanding that if we're aware that something's happening and we choose knowingly not object or resist it, but not to basically capitulate to it, then in a sense we are giving our permission for it to happen. And perhaps, it may not happen as much to the people that, are aware of it. Maybe they'll be able to sidestep a few of the minds and the tricks and the crap that they do to us, but yet everyone around us is therefore being affected by it as well. And then those people contribute, and then it's begun, well, if they're doing it and other people start doing it as well, and then everyone just starts going with the flow. And when you're going with the flow and you're looking at what's in front of you and it's Niagara Falls because you're about to go over the falls, then the people on the shore might start, acting different, like waving at least and saying, hey, there's a waterfall over there, so perhaps we don't want to go over the cliff, and throwing some ropes or some life preserving, those loopy things. I forgot, life boats or something or other. But, there might be perhaps a different way of how we continue moving forward. But anyways, I don't want to be late. As I promised, I'm going to take the camera and I'm going to show you the bridge that's being created. And there it is right there. We'll zoom it in. So the small orange one is the old one, and then the two other ones are the new big ones. Well, the one in front is not the new, it's actually our mass transit bridge. And then the other one over there, behind it, is the one that they've been building for many, many years. So anyways, I'd like to thank anyone and everyone who chose to share any of their attention with me and this podcast. Thank you so much for all of the beautiful. Here, we'll just finish it up on that grass there. And yeah, it's been a pleasure, and I look forward to sharing more. And I definitely encourage you, if you are part of the deep state and you're listening to this, or perhaps you're one of the secret societies that's not so secret anymore, maybe you too want to leave a comment and, let me know what you're thinking. Because honestly, I haven't a clue about what you're thinking. As I said, we're all sitting there in our boat. We're all looking over the side of Niagara Falls, and we're still heading for it because, maybe we're looking at the casino hotel that's in front of us as opposed to, the rapids and the drop that's we're about to go over on. Yet I see that if more people are guided to perhaps see that there are other options and other alternatives out there, no matter how many different languages we speak, no matter how many different skin colors that we hold, no matter how many places we came from or that we were freed from, that, we're in this together. And that's not a slogan created by a marketing company. Everything is going to affect all of us. And when we're able to actually see beyond our own safety nets, we can call it, recognizing that there are tens of thousands of homeless people, maybe hundreds of thousands now, if you look around the world, millions perhaps, in trailer parks, in park benches, underneath trees, underneath bridges, underneath everywhere. You know, as everything becomes more expensive, regardless of how much money you think you have in the bank, none of that really matters. Because what does matter is that we are collectively here together. So thank you so much for sharing your time and your effort with me. And as I said, I look forward to reading your comments, because whomever you are, it's about time that people actually, stand up and be recognized rather than hiding in the shadows and watching from a lurker's point of view. So that's not an insult to anyone, but that's definitely encouragement to, well, for more people. And perhaps I'm really just talking to myself. Perhaps all of this, that I'm maybe even behind a firewall, perhaps every viewer I've ever had, every comment that I ever had was from someone who was participating in the BS that we're all finding ourselves in. Yet, like I said, none of that really matters, because at the end of the day, you're here, I'm here, we're here. And if we don't do better, then, things are even going to get a lot more interesting than they already have. And if it's all fake, if the housing market is doing amazing and, everyone's buying into all these new small condos that have these amazing lakefront views, which, by the way, I would, of course, love. So if you're listening to me too, this building that I'm looking at, I would like to have a river view right on the front of the river at the highest floor possible, prefer the rooftop access area. I'd love to have that as well. So thank you so much, and I look forward to speaking to you soon.